On a quiet suburban afternoon, a luxury black sedan slowed at a routine checkpoint. To most officers, it was just another car. But Officer Grant's eyes narrowed the moment he saw the driver, a sharply dressed black man alone behind the wheel. Without hesitation, he waved the car aside, his hand firm on his holster. As traffic rolled by, the driver remained calm, yet there was something in his poised demeanor that didn't fit Grant's assumptions. He stepped out slowly, unbothered by the officer's brusque tone. What neither of them knew yet was that this stop would change Grant's career forever. Marcus Johnson had spent over 2 decades rising through the ranks of law enforcement. Known for his meticulous investigations and unshakable integrity, he had recently been appointed the head of internal affairs for the entire state. Today, he was driving home after a late meeting, his badge tucked discreetly inside his jacket pocket. Officer Grant, however, prided himself on his instincts, often mistaking bias for intuition. He'd been stationed at the suburban checkpoint for hours, bored and irritable, scanning each car that passed. When Marcus's sedan approached, sleek and expensive, Grant's mind quickly filled in its own narrative, one that had little to do with facts. The road stretched beneath a pale sunset. Other cars passed without incident, but Grant's attention was fixed on Marcus. A silent story, built on stereotypes, hardened in his mind. He motioned Marcus over to the side lane. Marcus complied without argument, parking neatly and waiting for Grant's approach. Years in law enforcement had taught him the dangers of escalating such encounters, even when he was the most senior officer in the region. His calm expression revealed nothing about his position or the badge resting inside his jacket. Meanwhile, a few drivers slowed as they passed, curious about the stop. Grant, fueled by unexamined prejudice and the adrenaline of perceived authority, barked orders louder than necessary. Marcus remained still, answering each question with a steady, measured tone. In that moment, the balance of power appeared tilted toward Grant. Yet the fundamental shift, the one that would expose injustice and prejudice, was only minutes away. Grant's questions quickly turned from procedural to accusatory. "Where are you coming from? Why are you in this neighborhood? Whose car is this?" Marcus answered each inquiry clearly, providing his driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. But every calm response seemed to provoke Grant further. His voice sharpened, demanding that Marcus step out of the vehicle for a search. Marcus slowly complied, exiting with deliberate movements. His eyes locked briefly on Grant's hand, which hovered near his holstered weapon. A gesture that revealed more than the officer's words. A few bystanders gathered on the sidewalk across the street, sensing the tension. One quietly raised a phone to record. The flashing lights of the patrol car painted blue and red streaks across Marcus's tailored suit. Grant inspected the car's interior without probable cause. His suspicion was fueled not by evidence but by the driver's appearance and composure. "This car seems a bit fancy for you. How can you afford it?" he muttered, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. Marcus said nothing, allowing the silence to hang heavy in the warm evening air. Years of training had taught him the power of restraint. The crowd grew slightly larger, their murmurs rising as they witnessed the unjust treatment. Grant radioed for backup, describing Marcus as uncooperative despite his measured compliance. The remark sent a ripple of unease through the growing audience. A second patrol car arrived and another officer stepped out, glancing uncertainly between Grant and Marcus. Inside, Marcus felt the familiar pang of disappointment. Not anger, but the weight of realizing how far the system he'd dedicated his life to still had to go. He considered revealing his badge then and there, but decided to let the scene unfold. Sometimes, allowing prejudice to expose itself was more potent than any immediate correction. Grant continued pressing, insinuating criminal ties and questioning Marcus's presence in the neighborhood. The second officer shifted uneasily, sensing the baselessness of the accusations. Marcus's silence was not submission. It was the patience of someone waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. The standoff reached its peak when Grant demanded that Marcus open the trunk for inspection. With slow precision, Marcus stepped toward the trunk, opened it, and then reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for the leather badge case that had been resting there all along. He flipped it open and held it high, his voice calm but carrying the authority of decades in service. Marcus Johnson, State Head of Internal Affairs. The words hit harder than any shout could have. The murmuring crowd fell silent. The second officer's posture straightened, his face reflecting a mix of surprise and dawning respect. Grant froze, the color draining from his face as he read the credentials. The very department responsible for investigating misconduct within the police force stood before him, and he had treated its leader as a suspect simply because of the color of his skin. The power shift was palpable. Marcus's eyes, steady and unflinching, met Grant's. He didn't need to raise his voice or deliver threats. The badge and the truth spoke louder than any confrontation. The onlookers began whispering, some shaking their heads at the irony. A few recorded closer shots of the moment, knowing this scene might soon surface in the news. The flashing patrol lights no longer felt like a display of authority, but a spotlight on injustice. Grant stammered an apology, but Marcus didn't respond immediately. He closed the badge case with deliberate calm and handed it to the second officer to verify. In that stillness, the years of systemic issues Marcus had worked to address seemed to crystallize in one brief, revealing moment. Word of the incident traveled quickly. The video, taken by bystanders, circulated online, sparking discussions about bias in traffic stops and the urgent need for continued reform. Within the department, an internal review was launched, not solely because of Marcus's title, but because the evidence captured by phones and dash cams made it impossible to ignore. Grant faced disciplinary action and mandatory retraining, while the second officer cooperated with the investigation, providing an honest account of what transpired. Marcus, meanwhile, chose to speak publicly a few days later. Standing at a press conference, he emphasized that the issue wasn't merely one officer's actions, but a culture that allowed prejudice to masquerade as instinct. His words were calm, yet carried the weight of both personal experience and institutional responsibility. The incident catalyzed renewed efforts to improve bias training, accountability, and community relations. Officers were reminded that their role was not to judge based on appearance, but to uphold justice equally. For Marcus, the encounter reinforced why he had dedicated his life to this work, not for titles or recognition, but for moments like this when the system had a chance to correct itself. As the story spread, people debated and reflected on it. Parents used it as a conversation starter with their children about fairness, respect, and the dangers of stereotypes. Others asked themselves more complex questions about their own assumptions. Perhaps the most lasting impact was not the embarrassment of one prejudiced officer, but the reminder that justice can only be served when authority is wielded with humility and without bias. And so, the traffic stop that began as an act of prejudice ended as a lesson for an entire community, a moment that turned an ordinary roadside encounter into a symbol of accountability and change.